A lot of research in code mixing and code switching revolves around the discussion as to what causes code mixing. Code mixing may be intentional or unintentional. By this, what we mean is sometimes learners or users of English do code mixing without even realizing, and sometimes they undertake the code mixing from one language to the other with some definite purpose in mind. So let's take a look at what actually prompts code mixing. Um, Sometimes it acts as a natural or unconscious language act. So the speakers do not even realize when they are mixing the codes or when they are changing from one language to the other, but they do it all the time. And there's no apparent reason. For example, it is not because they can't think of an equivalent word in the primary language that they're using, or that an equivalent word does not exist in the language. Apparently, there's no reason. Let's take a look at this example. This example has been taken from an email which was written by a Hindi English speaker to another Hindi English speaker. And in this email, they were discussing somebody's death and funeral. So we have this line as they're planning to go to Hardwar on Monday. I will tell you pucca tomorrow. Now, pucca over here is a Hindi word. We also use it in Urdu, and it means definitely. There's no reason why the writer of this email has used the word pucca instead of definite. Sometimes we can't really see any reason, but users of the language switch between two languages that they are good at. Sometimes this switch is made between two codes or two languages because a certain word represents a cultural element or situation which cannot be represented by a word in the other language. Our second example is also from the same email, where the writer says she was absolutely free of any obligation. This is when she talks about the person who has passed away. She was absolutely free of any obligation from anyone. No one had the time to do seva for her. Now, seva is a Hindi word which means to serve somebody, to offer your services to somebody. The word service or serve does not have the same connotations as the word seva. Seva has these cultural implications as to when you offer yourself completely in the service of somebody else, etc. So sometimes the code mixing is done to because a certain word carries certain cultural implications. Then there are many other reasons. For example, participant relationships. For example, who you are talking to. Maybe if you're talking to somebody who is also a bilingual or multilingual and is equally good at the two languages that you are code mixing or code switching, then you can freely code mix. But when you are talking to somebody who may be good at one language but not the other, then probably code mixing will not work. You can certainly do not practice code mixing when you're talking to monolingual people. For example, monolingual English speakers. Then there are situational factors. Maybe you're in a situation where code mixing is important or code mixing is absolutely necessary. For example, if you're delivering a lecture, you're addressing an audience where some can understand, let's say, English and the others cannot. Or maybe there are certain words which with which the audience may be unfamiliar. So you would like to code mix or maybe deliver half of your speech in one language and the other half in the other, so that everybody, the entire audience, understands. By delivering half the speech in one and half the speech in another, we do not mean that you deliver part of the speech at a stretch in one language, but what I mean is that you keep alternating between the two languages to make sure that the entire audience is following you. Then there's also the question of language attitudes. Maybe a language is looked at more favorably in the context where you are at a particular moment. So it is often believed that in Pakistani context, even if you're not very good at English, but your Urdu has a sprinkling of English, the other people, your interlocutor, will be impressed with you and will believe that you know English very well. So you must have come across Pakistani people who are not very good at English, but they would start every sentence with actually, or have this use of this phrase, you know, you see, when they are speaking Urdu. So sometimes it's a question of language attitudes. And then there are certain message intrinsic factors. For example, if you are quoting somebody, and you want to use the exact words of the person who has uttered those words, you would like to give the quotation in the language in which it was originally uttered. So, making sure that you are sharing somebody's words in as original a form as possible, you would do some code mixing or code switching. Similarly, there are certain interjections which are used in different languages, and people are so used to them that they use them even when they're using a different language. For example, in Malaysia and Singapore, the interjection la is used. So, Singaporean speakers of English and Malaysian speakers of English would often start their English utterances with the interjection la. Just as Pakistani English speakers, especially Punjabi English speakers, often use G. For example, G, would you like a cup of tea? Would you mind waiting for a minute, G? So sometimes these interjections are used in the first language or the first language of the speakers. Scholars and researchers also make a distinction between code switching and borrowing. Code switching or mixing and borrowing. Borrowing functions to provide necessary elements that do not exist in the primary language being used. For example, if you do not have an equivalent in the language, you would borrow the word from your primary language. Or sometimes a bilingual speaker himself doesn't have that word in his or her linguistic repertoire, or the word that he or she has does not express the exact meaning of their message. So if they do not personally know the word, the equivalent word, or if they believe that a word in the language that they're speaking will not express the complete intention of their message, they borrow words from the other language. When borrowing is done, phonological and morphological assimilation also takes place. For example, this word frappe, in America, it is nativized, and often speakers of American English pronounced it as frapp. Similarly, time is a word which is borrowed from English in Urdu, and often Pakistani speakers pronounce it as tam or tame. So it is nativized in our context, especially in case of people who are not very highly educated. Let's take a look at some examples of borrowing. And this borrowing works two ways. For example, we can borrow words from English when we are speaking Urdu, or we can borrow words from Urdu when we are speaking English. So let's take a look at these examples. मेरे पास time नहीं है. Now, time is an English word, but hardly anybody, when speaking Urdu, uses the word waqt, which is the equivalent of the word time in Urdu. So the word waqt has completely disappeared from Urdu language, and everybody uses the word time when they actually mean waqt. So मेरे पास time नहीं है. Similarly, the word chutney in Urdu and Hindi has even found some place in Oxford Advanced Learners Dictionary. And this word has been borrowed in English because in English we do not have an equivalent for chutney. So, can I have some chutney, please? Similarly, the word samosa has also found its way in Oxford Advanced Learners Dictionary, and you can confidently say a word like I ate a samosa with tea, and samosa again is a borrowing from Urdu or Hindi in English.